DTM, obviously. Okay, excellent. Steve obviously is a DTM and co-founder of Broward Bilingual Toastmaster Club, Florida's first bilingual Toastmaster club. Steve also served as Area 24 governor and as District 47 chair for new club expansion, where he developed many insights into how to promote the formation of new Toastmaster clubs. In his professional life, Steve has spent most of his career in the field of healthcare with major US and European companies where he held various positions, including regional director, Asia Pacific, and commercial director, Latin America. He also did expatriate postings in India and Taiwan, where he set up and managed new businesses. Steve also lectured as an adjunct professor on international business in the State University of New York at Binghamton, its MBA program. At present, Steve is an entrepreneur, founder, and president of Latin Nexus LLC, a company that assists small and medium-sized businesses in establishing sales and distribution channels in international markets. Apart from the sport of soccer, which he played in college and while living abroad, Steve's passion in life is the study of foreign languages. He speaks, let's hear this, folks, Spanish, Portuguese, French, Italian, Mandarin, Chinese, and Hindi. So with that, I would like to welcome, as our host this month, Steve Harwood.
Thank you, Mary Helen, and welcome everyone. First of all, by a show of hands, how many people here have got through the entire book? Okay, most of you, great. So this way we know who has actually read the book. I selected this book because it really is one of the most fascinating books that I've ever read. Fascinating and thought-provoking. What Malcolm Gladwell, is trying to do here is he's trying to challenge how we make sense of success. Because traditionally in the US in particular, we've always had this concept of rugged individualism, the self-made man characterized by actors like John Wayne, the guys that are gonna, the man on the white horse that's gonna come in and sort of save the day. And what Malcolm Gladwell is saying is that there are a lot more variables that go into success than we give people credit for. The first factor is one, it's opportunity and the ability to seize that opportunity, but it also has to do with something that he calls cultural legacy. And although he calls it cultural legacy, what he really means in effect is cultural ancestry, because it really signifies, who we came from, what kind of families we were raised by, and who our ancestors were, and really made us into who we are today. So that essentially is the central thesis of this book. And what I'd like to do is start off by asking first whether or not you agree with Malcolm Gladwell's central thesis. And I think to start off with, I'd like to call on distinguished Toastmaster Leslie Benfield. If you could just give us a little bit your thoughts, you can comment on that, or you can give us your impression of the book in general, but I thought it'd be good if you start off, Leslie.
Wow, okay, thank you very much, Stephen. It's an honor to be here with everyone and talking about this, one of my favorite books ever. I just came upon this book after it was suggested in the book club, and I downloaded it on the audio, and I was completely blown away by, initially I was very skeptical, especially when he was talking about these concepts such as many hockey players born in January. I thought, what kind of hocus pocus is that he's talking about? And then I continued listening because I chose the audio format. And the audio format, I'm so sold on audiobooks now because I can go cycling, I can listen to the book. And when I continue reading, I really understand. And then I got to a point where I started looking at my friends that I grew up with and went to school with and their success paths, and so much, there's so many parallels that I can see there. I can also see the parallels in my kids, and things about the little advantages. I coach soccer. I'm a soccer fan like Stephen, and I know that just being born a few months older, And being in that group of 10-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, you have such a huge advantage. And I even discussed it with my son, who's who's nearby and he's listening. And so I really do agree with a lot of the concepts that he raised in the book. And what's so fascinating, I think, about this book is it challenges you to look at simple things that you would kind of overlook. Like, for instance, when he talk about the successes of many persons like Bill Gates, who we just assume that, this person is self-made and, just that rugged individualism. It really challenges you to think differently. So I find the book so fascinating, and I'd recommend it to anyone who hasn't read it as well.
All right, thank you, Leslie. Is there anybody here who questions somewhat what Malcolm Gladwell has put forth? In other words, if you look at some of the reviews online, for example, some of them indicate that Malcolm Knight's my old boss. That's why I'm getting mixed up. But Malcolm Gladwell, he simply has cherry picked certain stories and vignettes and anecdotes that he's put together quite conveniently to sort of prove his point. Does anybody lend any credence to that, or would you challenge it, David?
Hey, good evening, Steve, fellow Toastmasters. Yeah, I reciprocate some of was it Toastmaster Benfield that mentioned about the hockey players. That was a fascinating insight, and going into the birth years of Gates and Jobs in the 50s. And that was all fascinating and a real eye-opener. But then I got into something of interest to me, which was about the airplane crashes and pilots that make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And this is an interesting part of his book, how he just went into that aspect of why these pilots are making these errors. And I would like I would like your input, Steve, because as a pilot, I see that air crashes from that angle. But what did you read when you read that section on the mistakes that pilots are making in the modern airplane environment? How did you read it?
Well, to me, it rang true, David. And it rang true because having worked in different countries around the world, particularly in Asia, everything, for example, I used in 2 years the word answer in Chinese, which is to give somebody a hint, more than I've used the word hint my whole life in the United States. And why? Because it's culturally driven. And the thing is that in certain cultures, and Colombia is another example that he used, people just cannot confront a higher level person's, a senior's judgment. You just can't do it. So what they do, it's almost like expectations. And as long as they realize that, as long as they're saying something that differs from what the individual is doing, you say in Hindi, which means a hint is enough. And a hint should be enough. And if the senior person doesn't take the hint, then they simply let it go, because they give the person a wide berth and a certain amount of respect in terms of their own judgment. So yes,
Correct.
that's what I saw. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I was going to ask you about that because you are a pilot. Okay. Are there any? Malcolm Gladwell defines success this way. Okay. It's a gift to those who have been given the opportunities and have the presence of mind to seize them. It's success about a commitment to hard work and perseverance, but it also is about luck and timing. Do you think that definition of success is too narrow or too broad? Anybody?
Yeah, Steve, I'll take that one.
Yeah, Joe.
I really enjoyed the summary of the Jewish people during the time of the boom of the textile industry in New York City, and he actually structured. It was like a 3-word explanation. The jobs in during those times, the people in that industry were able to enter it very easily because of the fact that all you needed was a sewing machine. So that during that particular time, just the fact that there were low barriers to entry made it a very fruitful place for a lot of people with the skills, the 10,000 hours of skills that they had acquired in Europe and brought to the United States to have a job that was where they controlled things and they made decisions and they were fulfilled by the work that they were doing. And that led them to have not just a job, but a great deal of happiness and productivity, and made them just very, very, I don't know, content in their work and also productive. So that was a very unique set of, macroeconomic conditions, which made that period a very fruitful one for the people that were there in it and had the skills. So definitely there's, I don't think Malcolm limited his analysis to, just birth dates or, there are so many different variables that could contribute to, an outlier's success. And as you go through the book, there's one after another, after another, after another. And it just, it made the way we analyze success much more detailed and thorough, which I thought was extremely beneficial.
Right. And what he was saying was that if you follow it through to the next generation, was that the offspring of all of these people that came from Eastern Europe of a certain ethnicity, it happened to be Jewish, with skills in the garment industry, that they had children, and those children saw how hard their parents toiled and worked in order to build a business, that these guys, the kids all became, he said, they all became lawyers. And he gave example after example after example of successful lawyers who ended up controlling the mergers and acquisition industry in the law field because of the example that their parents gave them. But I would also question here, and I'm trying to question some of the things that Malcolm Gladwell does, as much as I revere everything that he's written here. And that is that, he gives all these examples of Jewish kids whose parents were in the garment industry who became successful lawyers. But don't you think there's probably a lot of, non-Jewish kids from New York City, born around the same time, whose parents didn't work in the garment industry, but who happened to become very, very, very successful lawyers 30, 40 years later? It's just a question I throw out. So again, you go back to whether or not, does Malcolm Gladwell, he puts these things together, but he goes out and finds examples and anecdotes and stories to justify his point.
Well, he did talk about the success of the, the old conservative old boys club that met in country clubs on the weekends on Long Island and the beaches. And those were the dynamics that helped those group of lawyers prior to the arrival of the lawyers you just mentioned in the Jewish community. Right. So yeah, there were definitely, he actually points to the success variables that benefited, the non-Jewish community, and those were, the connections and the old boys club that was set up.
Right. So, but I would probably argue, Joe, that the Irish and the Catholic, the Irish and the Italians, at that time, at that particular time, were also pretty much excluded from, as you described, the white shoe law firms in New York.
Right. He mentioned in the book that the Irish and the Italians had more of their skill set was more focused on owning land in the suburbs and pursuing agricultural trades.
Right.
However, which didn't fit into an urban environment like New York. So so he did cover that aspect. Nonetheless, I'm sure that over the years, you know, there were plenty of Italians and Irish that worked their way into the legal industry over
Well,
time.
Mario Cuomo was one,
Right.
right? For example, Mario Cuomo Sr., not Andrew Cuomo. Okay. Any other comments about some of the stories that Malcolm Gladwell tells in the book? I mean, the stories are fascinating, whether it's the Beatles, Joe Flom, Mozart. The list goes on and on and on. What did you think about some of the stories?
Oh, I'll say,
What's that, David?
I would say, Steve, that, well, what I wanted to say was, and especially during the Industrial Revolution, we saw how the robber barons,
Mhm.
they were born in a certain era of the late 1800s, which positioned them to be magnates in steel, oil, the auto industry. And so this was an interesting revelation that being born in a certain segment of an era positioned you correctly to be the right age to become to benefit in a certain. These people became extremely wealthy by being born at a certain time, so that they reached that age to be these robber barons. And then I equated it to my younger sister, who was born in the 70s, and all of her friends are computer whizzes because of the time that they were born. The similarities are so similar to the book that it's a matter of when you were born. That my sister is a computer expert, but all the people in that age level share those same characteristics. And so I gained this from the book, which was again a fascinating, eye-opening revelation that I was glad to get from Malcolm, his insight, how he was able to write that and let us know that that was significant in their success.
Right. Elena, do you have a comment? Your hand is up.
Not so much a comment as a question.
Okay.
So I read the book and it was very engaging, definitely. A lot of interesting information, a lot of interesting insights. But once I finished the book, I was thinking, okay, what do I do with these insights? Like what kind of practical application could there be?
Mm-hmm.
Is it that I just tell myself, oh, I'm not a superstar because I did not have the right opportunity and I wasn't born at the right time? Or another option, which may be a bit more practical, I don't speak fluent Spanish because I'm not dedicating 3 hours for 10 years to it, right? So I'm kind of like confused, like the depth of the book and of the ideas and of the insights was so great.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, I wanted to be spoon-fed with what do I do with it? How do I apply it to life? What's next?
Mm-hmm. I haven't answered that, but who Garfield.
One concrete solution that I got from the book, and because I was in education, this kind of got me a little bit, and it's about the summer creep of kids who don't depend on the household you come from. If you don't have books to read, if you stay out for the whole summer. So we were always wondering what happened to kids. And one of the insight that I got, which was really impactful to me, was that it's not that the teachers are doing such a bad job. Is that the difference was when they go out for summer breaks and the engagement of the different parents.
Mm-hmm.
So it shows you how important it is, the home that you grow up in.
Absolutely.
So even though you might work hard, it's hard to replace your background. And I find that very, very insightful.
Yes, sure. Yeah.
Right. And I think, as I mentioned before, Garfield, what Malcolm Gladwell is saying here is that it goes way beyond even what kind of a family we are raised in, but really what is our ancestry and what is our sort of ancestral tradition, which, and he speaks about at the end, he talks about his own story, his own family story, which began when? It began, I think it's 1780 or something, when his great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather Ford met some girl on a pier, and that started his family. And how, for example, it was really his grandmother, because of tradition, Daisy Nation was her name, that she took the initiative to ensure that her her other daughter, she had twin daughters, Malcolm Gladwell's mother was one, Joyce, and that she also got a scholarship and was able to pay for that scholarship. And the way she did that was she went to the Chinese storekeeper, and all the storekeepers in Jamaica at that time were Chinese, Mr. Chance, and he actually gave her the money so that her daughter could go and get educated, which in today's dollars might be $50,000, $60,000, $70,000. So it was amazing. And if anybody noticed, the dedication of this book is to whom? It's to Daisy, which was his grandmother. All right. So that's a very, very interesting point. Now, coming back to what Elena said, Elena, I think that Malcolm Gladwell, in fact, mixes up several things here, because not everything is related to success. If you look at the Harlan County example in Kentucky, there's nothing there about success. It's about people killing each other since the Scotch Irish, their ancestors, came over in the early 1800s. But I think from a personal standpoint, you can't control too many of the variables, except for the one where he talks about practice versus intelligence, which is the 10,000 hour rule. And we actually all can control that. If we are really committed to something for many, many years, and we really aspire to being experts in a particular field, that's something where there is some practical application over which you have some degree of control. Doesn't mean it's easy, but you have some. Now, David Jess, do you have any comments on the 10,000 hour rule?
Actually, I have a comment to address what Elena was talking about.
Okay.
In terms of practical application, he didn't give us very many uses, but the one he did had to do with the KIPP school in the Bronx or wherever. And the idea was that they had transplanted the Asian culture for hard work, studying, and so forth in that school. And those students who came from a deprived background had an opportunity to get that extra study time, the extra teachers, and so forth. And what he was trying to say, in order to make everyone else an outlier, we have to bring those
values
systems that would allow everyone to become an outlier, not just a few. So if you take that as the example, you would want to spread that type of system throughout the United States so that everyone could have a chance to excel.
So what question I would ask you, David, as a follow-on, why is the title of the chapter Marita's Bargain?
She had to get up very, very early to go to school in another part of town, and of course come back very late. And then she had to study till late at night to make up for the deficiencies in her school system.
Essentially replicating what the Asian kids do in school themselves. They have to make tremendous sacrifices in exchange for a certain type of education, right? And so what did people think about Malcolm Gladwell's thesis about the rice paddies, and that the Asians come from a rice paddy culture, and that's why Asians, if nothing else, are much better at math than Westerners. Any comments?
Yes, Steve. Hi. I have multiple comments. Number one, Garfield, you might like reading the book, The Unequal Childhood, where a sociologist from UP was given access to 3 families of different economic statuses for a length of time. It was a very interesting book. And if there is a educator, I'm an adjunct professor, but I'm not in education. If there's an educator or adolescent psychologist, they could lead a very interesting book in the future in this book club. What he mentioned about hockey players, the SEC, I'm talking about the football conference, not the federal government agency.
Right.
And people in that area of the country, where I believe some of you are from, it is common practice for the parents to have their kids delay going to school in kindergarten, first grade, so they're a little older, a little bigger, and therefore become possibly better football players because they are better trained, since they will be bigger than a lot of their classmates and older at a younger age, of course. And remember, the 10,000-hour rule is very consistent, where they say you need to practice 5 years of whatever field you're in before you get a specialized talent, which is the equivalent of, we work roughly 2,000 hours a year, 50 weeks a year, 40 hours a week is 2,000 hours multiplied by 5 gets to 10,000 hours. So it is very consistent that we all have spent more than 5 years in a specialized field. I know Steve with his languages and culture has. I know Anna has spent many, many years in her field, and Joe has spent many years in his field, where they are specialists in their respective fields.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Very good comments. Anybody else have a comment before I go on? Stanley?
Yes, Steve, I have a
Joe?
comment. I think that the book at one point did just come out and compare the two aspects of intelligence, and he called one practical intelligence and defined it as knowing what to say, who to say it to, and what language to use when you're talking. And then the other type of intelligence was analytical intelligence, which is basically your innate ability, what you were born with, you know. And I think the book did really take a position that of the two, the practical intelligence what trumps analytical intelligence. So you know, basically, you know, you're a hustle, and you know what you put into it is, you know, of course, analytical intelligence is key, but one, you know, without practical intelligence, practical intelligence in the long run will trump analytical intelligence, everything else being equal.
Right, right. Okay, thanks, Joe. Lorraine has her hand up.
Yeah, one of the things that I kept thinking about throughout the book is that saying, the harder I work, the luckier I get. And it really, that does come down to that 10,000 hours. A part like your ancestry, who your mother is, who your grandfather is, what they did so that you could get here, that's totally out of your control.
Mhm.
That has nothing really, it has everything to do with you, but nothing to do with you. You have no control over it. It dictates, yes, where you live, if you come from a reading family, if you come from a family of farmers, and so forth and so forth. But what we do with the space and the time that we have, now that's where the magic is. That 10,000 hours is no joke. And we see that right now with the Olympics going on. People who have practiced more than 10,000 hours, like probably 50,000 hours for just one moment. How many of us is willing to do that? I'm not.
Right, right.
But that takes
Stanley?
a certain type of, sorry, Stephen, that takes a certain type of person coming from a certain type of background. Our Toastmasters Club, we meet at the Iceplex, right where the Florida Panthers train. I don't see them because I don't know what time they train. We get there at about 6:30 in the morning to start setting up. There are kids leaving because they've already done an hour of ice skating practice time. At 6:30, they left, they've done an hour already. And I don't know what time there is, but there are those parents who are sitting there bundled up like they're expecting snow in June. But when you've got that type, when you're in that environment where people are driven, how could you not be driven? You'd be totally shamed. And I'm from Jamaica. I have a Jamaican background. You'd be totally shamed if you're not as driven as everybody else. So that was my my takeaway with this book. And this is my third time reading it, but I listened to it this time and I enjoyed the audio a lot better than I read it. His voice was good. I liked his voice. I enjoyed the audio. So that's what I wanted to say.
Very good. Thank you. Stanley Lloyd. Stanley, did you have a comment?
Yes, I just wanted to, expand on the 10,000 hour philosophy that Malcolm subscribed to. And, as a kid growing up, I've always subscribed to a saying that success is when preparedness meets opportunity, or in reverse, where opportunity meets preparedness. So that 10,000 hours really kind of align itself very succinctly with that 10,000, with that saying, because in life, many people achieve success over a period of time. It takes practice. It takes honing in your craft. And I think Malcolm, of course, his example with Bill Gates sort of really highlighted that in terms of the amount of hours that he put into that. And then, of course, when the opportunity came for the company to find individuals to program in a certain code, he was there. He had put in his hours. And of course, he had the opportunity to do it. And of course, that resonates to me. I'm in technology, so I take special attention to that. Additionally, I also look at, the epilogue in terms of a Jamaican story when he spoke about his parent growing up in Jamaica, and in terms of how the colonial system was really there working against the natives or people who are not of a certain persuasion. Of course, I grew up in the Bahamas. I lived that. I was able to, maybe not to the extent that maybe I think he's a little older than I am, or maybe the same age, but his mother certainly be older than I am. In the Bahamas at that point in time, most of the colonial overlords, if you may call them, they had really started to phase out, but the system was still in place. So it requires you to really be extra vigilant in school, in work, to get the grades, and really to get out of that system to really make a name for yourself. So I think his book is beautifully written. I mean, I've read it. This is now my second time going through it. I went through the audio, and of course, it is an excellent, what I would call roadmap for success.
Very good. Anybody else with a comment? Elena.
I think I want to continue the thought that Joe introduced, which is the comparison of two types of mind, so to speak, or thinking, the intellectual mind and the practical mind, or as I would call it, persuasive mind. And especially that story that he had about, I think his name is Oppenheimer, the guy who led the Manhattan Project.
Robert Oppenheimer, right?
Yes. And the fact that in his younger years, he actually got away with murder or attempted murder.
Right.
All he got just like a slap on the hand, because he could persuade pretty much anybody into his righteousness, right? That he's right, into his opinion, bring a person to think as he thinks. And the way Malcolm was explaining it, that it's based on the way people grow up and how their parents ask their kids, express their opinion, to have an opinion, and to actually feel entitled. They build the sense of entitlement, that you're entitled to your opinion, you're entitled to be heard, you're entitled to being equal to anybody because you have something to say. And how far it carried that young Oppenheimer all the way into, through the university, through the attempted murder, through getting into the project and leading Manhattan Project, when, as the author describes, he was the least qualified person to do that. And now those skills are definitely something incredible. And those few times when I saw them in people in real life, it was like watching magic.
Mhm. Right. In fact, I've always believed personally, long before reading this book, that the way we articulate and the way we express ourselves is more a function of our family upbringing than of our formal education. And one example I would cite reflects somebody I met a number of years ago. I had an office in the, it's like in Cypress Creek, they had those executive offices. And I met a fellow whom, my goodness, he told me he had not graduated college, but he was one of the most articulate individuals I've ever met. And in fact, I was talking to him about very highly complex scientific technologies, and he was able to integrate that kind of vocabulary so quickly, I couldn't believe it. But then when I learned a little bit more about him, I found out that his father, notwithstanding the fact he had dropped out of college, was a dean at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. And his father had worked on the Trident, I think, under the Reagan administration. And so, as I say, it's a question of your family upbringing. And it has a tremendous impact upon you because you're exposed to it so much of your life that if you look at someone, for example, let me give you an example, John Kasich, when he was running for president. John Kasich uses all the right lingo, the political lingo, but as soon as you see him speak, he doesn't sound like a polished politician. He sounds more like a working class guy who sort of educated himself. And I think that's sort of the same thing. This is, we are, a product of our environment, but we're also a product of our tradition and our ancestry. One of the things that I wanted to ask apropos this is, what did you think about the story with Chris Langan? Chris Langan, remember, he had 180 IQ. And what happened to him? Does anybody remember? Elena, Stanley?
Nothing happens to him. Everything that he wanted to achieve, he was not able to achieve. He was not able to get the education that he was looking for. He was not able to actually speak to people or mingle with the people from whom he wanted to learn. He was not able to work on things that he wanted to achieve. And that was the parallel story with Oppenheimer.
Right.
That's
Right,
what
exactly.
they were running, right?
Right.
One gets away with murder, attempted murder. The other one cannot persuade the dean to change classes for him. That's it.
Even
And
though
the
he
whole
even
life
though he had
changes.
a even though he had a 180 IQ, which is one of the highest on record, he ended up doing what? He ended up as a bouncer in a bar.
Yes.
I mean, Leslie's not here, but Trudeau was a bouncer in a bar before he became president of Canada. Okay, so maybe there is some value in that profession. Lorraine, please.
Many moons ago, I was the vice president of a PTA of my daughter's school. And we
Right.
had a lady who came in and she used to run the Palm Beach School of Etiquette. We were doing an after school program. And this is over 20 years ago. And she did an awesome presentation and she was a Toastmaster, not hard to believe. And she made this statement and I've never forgot it. She said, I can take a kid who doesn't have a high school diploma and teach him social skills and watch him saw through life. And I could show you a person who has a PhD and no social skills and go nowhere.
Exactly.
And it's about how you relate to people. You know, we're talking about those practical skills. You know, those practical skills, you know, we all have to deal with each other. Unless you're gonna live in a basement, work in a basement, and we just throw cheese at you to work. But you've got to get along with everyone and learn how to do so. Some people are like Oppenheimer, masters at it. And then we're people like the other guy who think just being smart is enough. And it shows that it's not.
Mhm.
It's not enough.
Mhm. Were any of you surprised by any of the stories the anecdotes that Gladwell provided? I mean, I was, but how about you? I mean, we had stories about the Beatles. We had stories about Mozart. We had stories about, you know, the Chinese being much better at mathematics. Babette, you're on mute, Babette.
Okay, I'm on. My dogs and the dogs are quiet now.
It's okay. Go ahead.
What I wanted to say is that what I found out from the audiobook is that if you really want to be successful, one thing that you need to have is you've got to work hard. You've got to work harder than the other one, you know, like the rice paddies. These
Right.
people worked like, it seemed like 24 hours a day. And
Mhm.
it seems like the Asian kids were more learned in math because they worked more hours than the Americans. And I just thought the book was so fascinating. And it's the first time I've ever had an audio, listened to an audio. And I'm glad that you invited me to be part of the Zoom. Thank you.
Okay. What did most of you think about? Go ahead, Garfield.
One thing that struck me was how the Chinese new number system is set up.
Mhm.
And when you really think about it, it makes sense. 19 is 10 plus 9.
Mhm.
So in English, it's more in our tradition, it's more conceptual.
Yeah.
In there, it's practical. You can definitely see 10 plus 9 is 19. And for that, because we have to convert, we have to go through this step mentally. But for them, they don't have to because it's right there. So he said that at 5 years old, the Chinese is already a year or two above us because of the way how their system is set up, which really makes sense. I mean, I really enjoyed that part of the book.
Yeah,
I don't know if anybody get it.
Yeah, sure. I was going to comment on that, and either I can do it or Joe can do it. But if you look at the Chinese numbers, they are much simpler than our numbers, independently of the 10 plus 4 and the 10 plus 5. So if you look and count to 12 in English. Let's see how long it takes us to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. If you count to 12 in Chinese, it's like boom. It's like boom.
Single syllables.
That's right. It's like one syllable each. And then when you get into others, but it's very, very quick. And it's much easier to manage than in English. Much easier. The other thing that was interesting is, remember he gave this, I think she was Asian, her name was Renee, and he gave her a test to try to figure out something. And she just wouldn't give up on it. She just kept going and going and going and going until she got to the point of understanding it to her satisfaction. It took her quite a while to do that. And what he's trying to bring out is that normally when a Westerner doesn't know something and can't figure it out, they give it about 30 seconds of their best effort and they say, okay, I don't know how to do this. And they just move on. Whereas the Asian will keep working at it and working at it and working at it. And if you recall the rankings of the students in terms of working on an exam and how hard they're prepared to work were exactly the same as the rankings for the math. Exactly the same. Those were studies that were done by, I think, a guy named Schoenfield by I think at Berkeley University, who carried those things out. But it just showed how the Asians are much more geared towards working hard at something. And one thing we haven't touched upon, I think this is a good opportunity to do so, is also related, like you said, to the rice paddies, is we have a 9-month school year and the Asians have a 12-month school year. That has to say, that's screaming out something to us. What do you think about that? Garfield, you're an educator.
I think it makes sense, and it benefits some people. It depends on where you're from, on your parents and all of that, because some parents use the summer to give their kids education of another sort. Like them go to different countries, they look at different cultures, they learn, they go to different museums, they learn stuff, they read, but the problem that we have with it, it's not really the 9-month, is that some families are just not prepared for that 3 months break. So one kid will go play with their friends, watch TV, while others will learn and excel. And then over a period of time, that accumulates. So when you get to like time to take the SATs and stuff like that, that accumulates to a couple of years ahead of somebody else. So it's not really the time in the in schools, really. I think it's where because of the socioeconomic conditions that we all live in, different areas, different family, that is really what makes the difference. Because some parents are really good at providing their kids with excellent opportunities to learn outside of the classroom.
Okay, any other comments? Roosevelt, how about you?
Yes, I'd like to comment. First of all, congratulations, Steve, and everyone who has commented on this book. But I have 2 comments. The very first one is comparing the quality of education from a Chinese to an American solving math issues.
Mm-hmm.
And he has given an example. If you give, based on this study that you mentioned, if you give that example, a math problem to an American, in 10, 15 seconds, maybe 2 minutes, he thinks that he cannot solve it and he quits.
Mm-hmm.
And you give the very same problem to a Chinese, or not only Chinese, but to Asian,
Mm-hmm.
that same person at the same age will continue to the 15 minutes. He will exert effort until he tries. And at the end, what this person exhibits is the opportunity to develop persistence, perseverance in problem solving. That's number one. And my first comment also is to repeat what has already been said here. There are a couple of constraints in terms of success. And Malcolm Gladwell has mentioned those constraints pretty well. First, poverty. Poverty could be a constraint as well, it could be an advantage. Sometimes you can turn the advantage into
Or a disadvantage into an advantage. Yeah.
And vice versa, or vice versa. So that means you can take a disadvantage and make it an advantage.
Mm-hmm.
You can take your grandpa. My dad used to say, oh, I've been walking miles to go from this place to go to school. Now, will I be asking my son to do the very same thing that made my dad successful, to build that cultural legacy that you started with? This is something that we need to discuss. And also, when you mentioned the leadership ability, he said lots of entrepreneurs, and he mentioned Charles Schwab, he mentioned John Chambers, technology guys, but they have been dyslexic. This is not their home environment. They their impediment. They turn their mess into an opportunity. So that means if I'm dyslexic, I cannot learn the very same academic ways that people learn. How can I delegate tasks? How can I express myself? How can I develop my oral communication skills? So that's why success, there is no one train of thought. There is no one way of being successful. And that's why I started with those capitalization weights at the beginning. So what are the weights if you are in that position to be successful? This is an amazing book. I think I enjoyed the conversation so far.
Very, very good. Mary Helen, any comments?
I have a lot of comments to make, and many of you have made them already, about the idea of the Chinese working all year long. We've basically, Westerners come from a tradition of working our farms only during a season, and then we have the break. But the Chinese work their farms all year long, and they tend to be more entrepreneurial for that reason, is because they pay rents rather than be serfs or under the rule of someone else. So it's a different orientation. I also want to comment on the Jewish haberdasheries and sewers, is they came from Europe as skilled laborers. They were not able to own property, so they had to be entrepreneurs, they had to be skilled laborers, they had to have professions. When they came here, they were already set up with that mindset, so they were working hard to replicate that. What I see a lot of times in the United States is the first generation is not successful at all, but they hope that their kids will be successful. These immigrants actually in their own way were very successful because they set up this businesses going on. So they had kind of a head start coming in here. And also I believe, and it's just my observation that, in the Jewish tradition is very much more goal-oriented and achievement-oriented than some others. My ancestors came from Ireland, and who did they end up being? They ended up being servants and workers, and maybe some of them ended up being policemen and politicians, who knows? But it was a different cultural orientation. And I think the cultural orientation is really, really important in the conversation. I enjoyed every one of the stories. There was something special about each one, though. Thank you.
Right. Okay. There was something, I asked before the question, did anybody think that Gladwell's definition of success, was it too broad or too narrow? And one of the things that I think is missing from it, he does use the term, you have to work hard and persevere. But I think beyond working hard and persevering, I think that equally important, at least, is the ability to be resilient. Because if you look, he says, well, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Bill Joy, they were all born within 6 months of each other, 1955, the same year that I was born, by the way. All right. And these were all superstars in the computer field because of the timing and everything else. But what he doesn't tell you is that before Microsoft, Bill Gates actually started a company called TRAF, T-R-A-F, with Paul Allen, and it was a failure. And it was because of that failure that they were able to launch Microsoft and make a great success of it. And they said as much. They learned a lot about data points and evaluation and all that because of that. And look at Steve Jobs. I mean, Steve Jobs, who, remember, he was diagnosed with cancer. They said, look, you've only got a few months to live. Okay, he persevered, he kept going. But beyond that, Steve Jobs was actually thrown out of Apple at one point. Remember when they hired Bill Scully as the chairman? And then Steve Jobs went out and he got back up. And this is what I mean by resilience. And he started a new company. He started a company called Next. And he started a better known company called Pixar. And Pixar became so big that it ended up taking over Apple. And then Apple again became the main sort of focus of that business activity. But Apple became the first company, notwithstanding Bill Gates and everybody else. It became the first company to have an asset value of $1 trillion with a T dollars. And so to me, you not only have to persevere and you have to work hard, but I think resilience is really, really important, because I remember years ago, Joe Biden said, this is long before he was president, he said, look, It's not how many times they knock you down, it's how many times you get back up. And I really believe that that should be in the definition of Malcolm Gladwell's success, because it's something that's amiss.
Steve,
Go ahead.
I think you raised the point of, was he too broad or too narrow?
Yeah.
And I think that he was not too broad. I think he was very suitably broad, because the book opens up with a very interesting historical anecdote of the Rossitans from a part of Italy. And the people in this part had well, I forget the name of the place.
It was Rosetto,
right. And they moved to a certain place in Pennsylvania, and they established a community which was very harmonious and sociable and positive, and everyone helped each other. And the one variable that he couldn't figure out at first was, their diet in the US was much worse than their diet back in Italy. Yet they had very low rates of obesity and heart disease and all. And the one thing that he attributed to their healthiness was just the sheer fact that the macro community was conducive to friendly relations and harmonious relations, and the people were just happy being there. So what mattered was not the micro issue of their diet, it was the macro issue of the favorable environment in which they lived. So, and there are numerous other anecdotes throughout the book, like, he did a comparison between people that were born during the Depression and people that were born during more productive times, and how being born during the Depression wasn't going to help you much. Being born during, more favorable economic times helped you a lot. So I think his analysis really spanned the range from, individual attributes to, family environments to, the overall broad sociological and economic environment as well. And he covered all those things really nicely, So I think he was not too broad. He really, covered quite a few things that needed to be discussed.
Right. No, that was very interesting. Now, somebody just asked me if we could kind of refresh the discussion. We're talking here about Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Outliers. And Malcolm Gladwell's thesis is that success is attributable to certain key factors, primarily opportunity, the ability to seize that opportunity, and also what your cultural legacy is. Okay, and so that's really what this discussion is about. Somebody had asked me through the chat to sort of do that. That's it. Your comments are very well noted, Joe. One of the comments I wanted to make, in fact, about his prologue, which is about this sort of transplanted town from Italy to Bangor, Pennsylvania, is how well controlled is the study that he did in order to be able to conclude that it's the enhanced social interaction and accompaniment that has resulted in better health. I mean, how do you actually show that? It's a very interesting concept, and it's a very nice conclusion that fits very well. But how do you actually show that scientifically rather than just empirically?
I'd like to comment on this, Steve, because the town's called Rosetto. Yep. And it was the social interactions and the cohesiveness and the relative isolation away from the other towns that created that situation. Okay, but later on, as people moved away from Rosetto and those advantages went away, for one thing, the people that were less advantaged and more advantaged in Rosetto at that time, they didn't show it. Everyone was like each other. It was a very socially egalitarian town. But once people started to move away, all those advantages went away from those populations when they tested them later on down the road. They did not exist any longer. It was a certain time and space from the early 1900s when the immigrants started moving into that area until what is the 1960s and 70s when they started to disperse, as we all did in the American, transmigration through our country. So it was an interesting story, though.
Oh yeah, no, and I think he used it to sort of kick off his whole sort of thesis. He said,
Mhm.
I wanted what this doctor, I think his name was Westerfield or something, did in terms of his health study in Roseto. I want to use that same approach to look at others examples of success and how you analyze them with factors beyond like the self-made man and the rugged individualism. Elena, is your hand up? Yeah, please.
I'm just wondering about success, right? Like you raised the question, definition of success. And I think for each and every person, it might be different.
Mm-hmm.
And his definition is right for him and for many other people. And I know that in my younger years, definition of success was recognition, making good money, being able to travel around the world, right? Having a lot of friends, right? And now my definition of success is completely different. I mean, I still want to have money to pay my mortgage and retire as soon as possible. But in the end, all of that, I want so that to be happy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when reading this book, I was actually thinking, I wish Malcolm had written a book about outliers not for success, but for happiness.
Mm-hmm.
Because even that small town, Roseto, people were happy and that was contributing to their health.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we're talking about Chinese being good at math because they worked hard, when we're talking about Americans having what Chinese don't have, which is freedom of speech, right? It's all awesome. But in the end, every year, when the Institute of Happiness conducts their research trying to find the happiest country,
Mm-hmm.
it's never China and it's never United States.
Right.
What countries are these? Scandinavian countries.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Finland, year after year, they are always coming. So what magic formula do they have? What is their success of happiness? That's what I want to know.
Good
and they
point.
say part of it is because they have those social connections that were described about Rosetta, right? And also they have that not worry about the future because they know that if they get cancer, they will not have to go bankrupt, right? So that helps as well. But I really would love to know Malcolm's study about that and know, is that all or is there something else?
Good line of questioning, actually. Lorraine, your hand is up.
You know, during this pandemic, one of the groups of people that were affected the most were our elderly, especially our elderly who live in nursing homes who didn't get an opportunity to see families. And I'm sure those numbers will come out to see just how many of our elderlies passed of absolute loneliness. We are social creatures. We thrive with knowing that we are our brother's keeper. As time has gone past through, you talk about, Mary Ellen talked about the great migration and I don't want to say destruction, but it is a kind of destruction of, we live down here in Florida, grandma and grandpa live here, aunts and uncles live here. We only get to see our families. But one of the things that these countries have is this intergenerational living, that you have 3 generations that may live in the same house or on the same street or in the same building, and you never have to be alone. You're just talking about being sick and knowing that you don't have to, your bills are being paid, but being sick and know that you may pass, but you never have to die alone.
Mm-hmm.
That's a
Good
big
point.
thing.
Yeah.
That's a huge thing. And that was one of the things that I thought about reading that study. And I've read that study before, is that we need people, when we sometimes say things like, I don't need you, or I don't need anybody, I'm okay by myself. No, we're not. We don't work well like that at all. So that was an eye opener. That was a good
Right.
opening to the book.
We have a lot of people here who did not grow up in this country, and I'd be interested in hearing some of their thoughts on this. Arnaldo, do you have any thoughts on this? Doesn't have to be about the book per se, because I know I invited, but just in general about the conversation, maybe.
No, it's interesting. It's interesting, but I think that at this point, I think Elena said what I think. Well, she has my point of view. I start reading the book, and the first thing that I notice is he speak about success, but never make a definition of that word, and that's the key of the book. So if we think about that, everybody has the right to define the word as he wants, as everybody wants. So it's not the same concept for everybody.
Right.
In that case, big fail, big mistake. The book is interesting, but for American mentality. Because American mentality is just money. If you have success, it's because you have money. And if you define what is success, never, ever appears the word money. The definition of success is like the action or activity which end is success, is to be happy. I'm sorry. Action or activity which end is to be happy. And what is to be happy? Is the access to be happy, the happiness. Now, it's complicated, but at the end, never you're gonna see money like part of that word. However, I'm sorry. However, the book is interesting because it's a good motivation for everybody who wants to read the book. At the end, he's gonna get I would say a good message, an optimistic message, but 100% is not true. The book is not true. That's my opinion.
Stanley?
So one thing from a sheer observation, and we can just take this back to Toastmasters. Most of us here are Toastmasters. And when we're evaluating a speech, we always look at the objectives. The objective of his book was primarily outlier. And his definition of outlier was a statistical observation that is markedly different in value from others in the sample. So we have to look at this book from the perspective of the fact that in what he's doing, he is sticking to his objective. And I thought all of these examples that he brought up, really you're able to observe the value in terms of what he has brought. So again, that is the objective. So when we take it to the point where we bring in happiness or success, I think we're going about a little too far from what he had really intended to do. Because each of us have different values when it comes to success. How do you quantify happiness in each one? Can you observe any data points where we can see if somebody's happy? No, you can't do that. But you can go and look at statistical value of the life and the work and the things that these people did to quantify his definition of outlier. So I think we keep that in mind when interpreting what the book is all about.
Garfield.
I think what the point of the book is, was there's no such success is predictable. And there's certain things that happens that makes you successful. You are not successful by yourself.
Exactly.
The year you were born has something to do with how successful you are. And I bring this back to like Michael Phelps and Usain Bolt. I mean, Usain Bolt would never be a good swimmer because he doesn't have the build for it. Just like Michael Phelps would not be a good track star because he's not built for that. So they are lucky in terms that they were born a certain way. And Usain Bolt is one of the first recipient of the revamped Jamaican track team. This is the first time that they really built a program where they get outside coaches and really put money into the sports. So he's one of the first recipients of that. Would you say he was lucky to be born when he was born so that he could take advantage of it, even though his physical structure supports that role? So what he's saying is that you don't just get there because of hard work and dedication. There's other things that goes with it. Right. And that's all the book is trying to say. It's not talking about happiness or anything like that.
But hard work and dedication, perseverance, and even resilience are essential ingredients in order to make it.
Right, but you have to have certain things that goes for you too.
Absolutely, but if you don't have that, it's not going to make any difference. It's for example, when he talks about geniuses, and he says that up until 130 IQ, the more you go up, the higher you go, the more intelligence you really do have that can be readily applied. But once you go above 130 to 160, between those two points, it really doesn't make that much of a difference. It really depends upon you. He makes the same argument. The analogy he draws is with a basketball player. And he says, if you're under 6'6" as a basketball player, you're at somewhat of a disadvantage. So you've got to really work like crazy just to be able to get on the court. Once you get to 6'6", above that height, it really doesn't, the extra height doesn't really do you that much more good. You have to be able to create your own sort of opportunities for growth and development.
Right, but the 6'6" is where you were born lucky. That's where you get.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you got to get to the 6'6" first, and then you got to work the rest of the way.
If you're below 6'6", you're sort of unlucky. If you are less than 130 IQ, you're unlucky. Okay.
It's just like Bill Gates, or Paul Allen, if they didn't get to a computer lab at that age, it doesn't matter how bright they are.
That's right. Right.
They would never get where they get to. That's what he's saying, is that some things just luck and you just get there.
Right. Absolutely. In fact, he says, if you had several million more students at 13 years old with the opportunity that Bill Gates had at Lakeside, the private school he went to that actually had a computer lab, and the way he was able to hook up with the University of Washington, we would have had 1 million more Bill Gates
exactly
in this world. That's right.
Hey, Steve.
Yeah, Joe.
I wanted to address the points that Elena and Arnaldo were talking about before, which I think focused on the subject of happiness and fulfillment. And I think that there's one part of the book in which he talks about this quite extensively, and it's in the chapter called "The 3 Lessons from Joe Flom." Right. On page 149, there's a very brief passage which sums it up very nicely. He says those 3 things: autonomy, complexity, and a connection between effort and reward, most people agree, the 3 qualities that work has to have if it is to be satisfying. It is not how much money we make that ultimately makes us happy between 9 and 5. It's whether work fulfills us. And then he goes on and he talks about it. So he does cover this topic pretty nicely, in my opinion.
Yeah, and he relates it back to the rice paddy example, which takes a lot of meticulous and expertise. It's not just about working hard. There's a lot of expertise that goes into this to be able to do it properly and to be able to earn a living at it. That's absolutely correct. Thank you. Are there other people here who have not? Andre, you're an educator. Any thoughts come to your mind?
Thank you, Steve. Great conversation, and in terms of the richness of the book, I didn't read the book, but to listen to everyone, there are a few things that I take away. But before that, when I heard the name of the book, Outliers, what I thought will be that everyone has a way of being successful, which can be explained by these outliers. So I see it in this way, that there are many variables that contribute to everyone's success or failure. There are some constraints, some dependencies that will play into how you succeed in your life, which everyone probably point on some of them. But I want to just go back to one thing that is, to me, is like when you look at the Maslow hierarchies of needs. At each level, there is success that can be found in each level, depending on how the person, what is their need at that moment. And if they move toward that pyramid, that success will be defined differently as well. But overall, I think that's one thing that you point out, that which probably resonates with me, that in the book, that will probably define what will be the outlier, is how much perseverant somebody needs to be able to be successful, and also how much it comes down to being resilient. If somebody mentioned earlier the Olympics, how many times those people have to go through their training to just have that small moment. If you take too much time to pound on your failure or your success, probably you will fall when the time comes for you to be able to face adversity. So to me, it's that's where I will probably define what is the outlier. So I'm looking forward to read the book to see extensively how he defines it as being an outlier, because in my view, when you look at statistics, outlier is something that doesn't fall within the normal definition, but you can find something to be able to point to the reason why that could be a response or a result or an outcome. So, but overall, it's very good. I love the discussion.
Thank you. And I would just say that the one statement that Malcolm Gladwell makes that affected me viscerally the most is when at the end of the book, I think it's at the end of the book, or for those of you who listened to the audiobook, there was an interview with Malcolm Gladwell at the end, and he says, effectively, he said, in fact, there are no outliers, meaning that there is an explanation for everybody's success or failure, including Mozart, including Joe Flom, including the Beatles, okay, including the guys that play hockey. There are no outliers. It's all explainable if you just look into their backgrounds.
No, that was my next point, Stephen. I'm happy you made that one. That the book is really saying there's no outlier.
Right.
Success is predictable. So it's all these guys, they're not special. They take advantage of the opportunities that they got because of certain things. Just like if you're a hockey player, because you have talented hockey player that bonds a certain time, but they just weren't big enough to succeed at the time. So it's just that they are, as you say, there are he should say there are no outliers. Maybe that should be the topic of the book.
Yeah, that could be the subject of the book, but that's what that's
what he's trying to say.
To explain, yeah, sure. Okay. Are there any other comments before we begin to wrap up? Cindy, do you have anything? Are you there?
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
Yes, I'm trying to put like my video for something. Okay, right, let's see. I have not. I've not read the book, but when you invited me, I started like researching, like to look for summary, and I was super enriched by the conversation today. I have just one question because I've not read the book, even if I read some summary, is the fact, what is in the book, the thesis about opportunities? Because for me, I think like there is talent everywhere. Everybody is born with gift, with talent, but you don't have opportunities everywhere. So we could have like more outliers and more successful people, but because, and I would go like super extreme, when you live like in dictatorship, and at this moment we have like all these crises in Cuba, in Afghanistan, like all the crises that we have throughout the world, and before in the US or in other European country, we have slavery. We have like millions of people who have like all the talent and gifts to do something extraordinary, but because of the context, they were not. So I don't know how this is addressed in the book, or if it is addressed in the book.
Well, I think he does address it in the book, particularly, Cindy, under the story about the KIPP school and their approach to teaching mathematics in particular, where he says, most students believe, I'm either good at math or I'm not. And they adopt a very, very slow approach to explaining mathematics. And then lo and behold, a lot of these kids have become accountants in their profession because they realized that they could do math if the approach was correct. It's the same exact thing. And you speak several languages, and Andre and a lot of the people here, that I find with foreign language, that Americans tend to think I'm either good at it or I'm not good at it. Most believe I'm not good at it. But the fact of the matter is that they've never really had a chance to develop that potential that they have, because the approach was so sort of cut and dry. And so I think our approach to education in general needs to be much broader, and we need to be much more patient in the way that we teach people things, so that they can gain an understanding and develop that sort of untapped potential that they have in many, many areas, not just in one in particular. David?
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Cindy. David, a comment?
Which David?
Yeah, distinguished Toastmaster David Jess. How do you like them apples?
Oh, yes. One comment I had, which was really interesting, relating to the students in the summer break. That's one of the reasons why libraries have their summer programs, is to help address those issues of not having enrichment during those 3 months. And now I have a better idea of what we're doing, not just that we're doing to do it for the gap, but the reason behind that gap. So that was kind of enlightening.
Okay. Carmen, any thoughts? You're on mute.
Still on mute.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Stephen, for the invitation. I really enjoyed the discussion. I wrote a few notes because at my age, I need to write notes. I don't want to forget about anything. But this is my point of view based on my life experience. I believe success doesn't have to be linked to money, but rather to attitude, expectation of life, and your talent and your passion. When I understand about successful, I have to compare how I was raised up. I have parents that they have totally different backgrounds in economical and social. My father was a farmer. My mother was from the city. And as you can imagine that the happiness for my dad, it was just be a good person. That was success for him. To have a good family, it was success for him. He didn't have no expectation of gathering fortune or anything like that, traveling. or have any recognition what he does in his job. That's what he did. He was a workaholic. He worked all day in the farm. On the other hand, my mom, being from the city, it was totally different. She had totally different expectation of life. She was more care about our well-being in terms of education, even though my father wants to get into education. But for him, it was more like be a good person. That's it. My mom was a little more, okay, why are you gonna go to study? You need to be a good person. You need to relate to good people. You need to be successful. You need to consider your social friends and all of that. So I really have a big, broad understanding what success is. That is what I apply in life. Another thing that I would like to share with you guys is about, there is two types of successful, and this is my own opinion. I haven't read the book. I just gathered the information from what you are saying. Success could be collective. Depends of the culture you are, the country, your social gathering. And another way is your individual success. For me, particularly, I see success is based mainly on start with idea. When you have an idea, you are able to put a vision on it. And that idea, you have some kind of intuition, you say, because your mind and yourself start thinking, is that a good idea? And you have this inspiration to move forward, no matter what the obstacles are. And this personally, I have working on a project, and everything starts with idea. This idea, it was not related on what I studied, what I was doing for work, or anything like that. It just, I was in a place that it was presenting a situation, and that's it. I got an idea, and that inspired me to move forward and do whatever it takes to learn and prepare for that simple idea that it came in 1 second. I didn't even looking for. I wasn't thinking, okay, I need idea. What can I do? No, it just came to me. And now that I have that idea, when I say I have to be in the right time and in the right place, that when I agree, you have to be prepared. Because it doesn't matter how much talent you have. It doesn't matter whether you are lucky or you have all the things that is ready for success. You have to be prepared. So I really enjoy, I believe that the book, it doesn't cover everything what we agree or disagree, but we have to understand that he creates some objective, and based on their objective, Stanley, I believe he mentioned that, he has to develop the book. So sure, we disagree that he didn't do that, but we have always has to, when I criticize a book or give my opinion, I really have to base on the objectives of the author. And I appreciate it. I'm glad, Stephen, we got contact again, and I'm glad to be here.
Okay, thank you, Carmen. Thanks for those comments. Okay, we're just about out of time. From my side, I'd just like to thank everybody for all the invaluable contributions that you made. I think this is an excellent discussion, and I would now like to turn things over to Mary Helen Day, who will tell us about the upcoming meeting.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Great conversation, great job, and thank you everyone for attending tonight. I think that we have a lot of themes that run through this, and we are in Toastmasters, but I want to ask everyone to raise their hand. Who has read this book, Think and Grow Rich? Anyone raise their hand with this? Okay, great. I was in sales years ago, and one of the things I found coming from a cultural background, as Carmen would suggest, is that my cultural background was somewhat negative in the way they were thinking. So I had to learn how to change my mind. How do I think in a more positive manner? And all of your self-help books, many of them build themselves off this particular book, Think and Grow Rich. Now I'm gonna make someone feel a little uncomfortable tonight, but I'm gonna tap my hand on Garfield's shoulder. Garfield, And I'm asking you to be our host for our next meeting on Think and Grow Rich. Would you accept it, or you can refuse if you'd like?
Sure, I'll take it.
Okay, so Garfield's going to be our host on Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. It is a classic. It was written in the 1960s. Napoleon Hill actually did a study of many of the people that he felt were successful. And if you saw that list in the outliers of people that made a lot of money, it was because they were at the right time in the right place in American history. We're beginning our expansion culturally and with our transportation systems. And they didn't have income tax at that time either. So they acquired huge fortunes. But this will be another way we can transport the conversation we had about outliers to this book, this old classic, Think and Grow Rich. And our host next month will be Garfield. Thank you, Garfield, for accepting. And thank you, everyone, being here tonight. And with that, we will close down our book club for this evening.
Thank you,
next
everybody.
month.
Thank you.
Take care.
Good
Bye.
night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
I did, everyone.